Richard Frances Cottingham, born on November 25, 1945 in the Bronx, New York City. When Richard was a young boy, he showed signs of not being normal in himself. He couldn't make friends with the other children in school. The other kids thought he was a bit strange. When Richard was about 12 years old, his family moved from the Bronx, New York to Riverdale, New Jersey. Richard came from a loving family. His father worked for an insurance company, his mother was a homemaker, and the family was financially stable. Richard still had problems making friends at school. He would stay in and look after his pigeons. However, when Richard started high school, things changed for the better. He made two friends, and they hung out together all the time. Richard went on all the time about girls and what he'd like to do with them. Although Richard himself didn't have a girlfriend, when Richard left school, he was offered a job straight away working at his father's company as a computer operator. Richard accepted while he worked for Metropolitan Insurance. He took 7 computer courses to get his computer skills higher. Richard was offered a job as a computer operator by Blue Cross Blue Shield, which he accepted. While Richard worked there, he shared a workstation with another guy named Dominic Volpe. They shared the same shifts, and Richard would talk all the time about prostitutes and sadistic sex, and how he could get any woman he wanted. But although Richard went on about sex, he was also a very intelligent person. On October 27, 29-year-old Nancy was on her way to play bingo at her locale church that she normally attended. Later that evening, Nancy didn't go home on time, so being worried, her husband phoned friends and family asking if anyone had seen Nancy. When no one had seen her, he phoned the police and reported her missing. The next day, the police searched the neighborhood but found nothing. On the 30th October, 2 12-year-old girls were playing upstairs in the front bedroom. One looked out the window and see something in a car, so they went outside to have a look. As they looked through the car window at what they thought was a mannequin, they realized something was wrong, so they went and got a neighbor who took a look and realized that it was a body. When the police came, they took the body to the station. When the body was examined, the horror of what happened, the poor girl came to light. She had been savagely beaten, sexually assaulted, her hands were bound behind her back and strangled. It was confirmed that the body was Nancy Valgo, but there wasn't any clues to the crime as to who done it. Richard went into work and started talking to Dominic, who thought Richard was crazy about what he always went on about sex clubs he would visit and how he would show prostitutes a handful of money and tell them he'd won at the casino and they'd do anything for him. Dominic also thought that Richard was a little strange, as he would sit in his chair throughout the whole shift, shaking his leg and rocking to and fro. After work, Richard would go for a drink to relax. He had taken to drinking quite a lot. May 3, 1970, Richard got married to a woman named Janet, and they set up home at a little place named Little Far-E, New Jersey. However, Richard still worked in New York. On the 21st of August 1972, Richard was arrested for shoplifting at Stern's department store in New Jersey. He was ordered to pay a $50 fine. Richard and Janet were happily married, but he found his sex life was boring and tame, so he would have affairs. September 4, 1973, Richard was once again arrested for robbery and assault, but the charges were dropped. He swore to his wife the police had made a mistake, so she forgave him. October 1973, Richard's son Blair was born. Not long after he was born, Richard was arrested again for unlawful imprisonment and robbery. Again, the charges were dropped. In 1975, the family moved to a 3-bedroom house, Lod, New Jersey. In March 73, their son Scott was born. Then their daughter Jenny was born in 1976. During this time, Richard stayed out of trouble, but it was short-lived. He started having an affair with a woman named Barbara Lucas. He was with Barbara about 2 years. The affair ended in 1980. Richard didn't care the affair ended. He thought he was good-looking and he knew he was charismatic. He wouldn't find it difficult to find another woman, even if it was a prostitute, which Richard quite liked. During this time, however, Richard would go with a girl for a couple of months and then finish with her and find another girl to go with. Christmas 1977, 26-year-old Marianne Kaur went missing. She was on her way to visit her mother-in-law but didn't arrive, so she phoned the family, but no one had heard from her, so her family phoned the police. The police came and looked around and questioned the neighbors and found nothing, but unfortunately on December 16, 1977, Marianne's body was found in a parking lot in the grounds of Equality Inn Motel. Marianne had marks on her wrists and ankles due to handcuffs and rope. She also had a long mark around her neck. She had bite marks all over her body. Her breasts were savagely bitten and there were marks across her mouth from duct tape. Her trousers were ripped and half of her hair was cut and laid on her stomach. September 1978, Karen Schalt was drinking alone in a bar and a man named Han Sharper, who was really Richard Cottingham, started talking To her he is asked if she was a prostitute. Karen, who felt insulted, said, "No, I'm not, I have a boyfriend," and carried on drinking her drink. However, Richard wasn't going to leave her alone in spite of the boyfriend. He waited until she went to the restroom and brought her a drink. He then spiked it. Karen came back and he smiled at her and handed her the drink, apologizing for asking if she was a prostitute. As she sat down, she started to drink. "I feel strange," she said as she stood up and walked to the door to make her way home. She walked slowly down the road. All of a sudden Richard pulled alongside her. "Would you like a lift?" he asked. "Yes, please," she said. Richard opened the door. Karen fell inside and was passed out. Richard started to drive. She started to come round. He stuffed another 2 antidepressant pills in her mouth. 9:30 a.m. Little Fiery Police Department patrolman Raymond Alga found Karen's body stuffed inside a sewage ditch. Her shirt was pulled up showing her breast. One of them had been burnt with a cigarette and savagely bitten, and her trousers were pulled down. The patrolman performed CPR on her, saving her life. He went to the hospital to find out if she could remember what had happened to her, but due to the drugs she couldn't remember anything that happened the previous night. The doctors did test and said she had secotorbarbital and homobarbitol in her system. October 1978. Susan Giga met Richard. He offered her $200 for sex, but she had other appointments. Richard suggested they met the next day. Susan agreed. The next day Richard met Susan. He took her out for a drink. Richard told Susan that his name was Jim and he was married and he had 3 children. When Susan went to the ladies, Richard brought a round of drinks. As he waited for her, he spiked her drink. After Susan drank the drink, she started feeling faint and sick. Richard took her outside and put her in his car and drove to a motel. The next morning she couldn't remember anything, and being still affected by drugs and a bit daisy, she suddenly realized that Richard was on top of her and raping her. She fell asleep once again. The next time she woke up she was on the floor and bleeding from her vagina, her rectum and her breast. He had beaten her face and her mouth were swollen. She could just about stand up. She managed to scream. Someone in another room heard her and phoned the police. It was Captain Johan Agar of the police department answered the call. It wasn't long before the police knocked on the door to the room they were staying in. Richard made Susan answer the door as he stood behind her with a knife pressed into her back. She opened the door as she stood there with her ripped trousers, busted mouth and blood on her. The police asked if everything was okay. Susan said yes, but she spoke with her eyes. The police pulled Susan out the door towards them, then rushed in and arrested Richard. The police searched the room and found nothing apart from a towel that was full of dried sticky semen, which was taken for forensics. Richard's favorite place was Times Square. It was full of pornography, peep shows, gambling and prostitutes. In November 1979 Richard booked, using the name of Carl Wilson, booked a motel room in the Travel Inn. Once he was inside his room of 147 he placed a do not disturb notice on the door. December 2, 1979 picked 2 prostitutes, Alga Gardazzi, an illegal immigrant, and Jane Doe, who was around 20. He took them to his motel room. The next morning the housekeeper went to clean the room. She got a shock. There were 2 naked bodies covered in blood, one on the floor of the bed and one on the floor. The police were called. The bodies were taken to the station and examined. They had cuts over them from a knife and slashes. Their breasts were nearly cut off. They had been tortured and wrapped multiple times. He then strangled them, cut off their hands and their heads, placed them in a bag and left the motel. As he walked through Times Square he was stopped by a policeman who asked him where he was going to get something to eat. Richard replied, "On your way," said the copper, not even asking what was in his bag. What Richard was trying to get rid of somewhere where it wouldn't be found easily. May 5, 1980 Marianne Sankurli, who was a housekeeper at Quality Inn Motel in Asbo Heights, New Jersey. She was cleaning room 132. She was trying to hoover under the bed, but something was stopping her. She could smell a rotting smell that made her feel sick. She tried to pull the sheet off the bed, but it was caught on something. She walked to the other side of the bed to try and free it. When she pulled up the sheet, to her horror there was a dead body covered in blood. The police was called. The body was taken to the station and examined. The woman was identified as 19-year-old Valerie Hamstreet. She'd been tortured. There were cut, slashes and bite marks all over her. Her nipples were hanging off. She had tape across her mouth. Her hands were handcuffed behind her and she was wrapped multiple times, and all her belongings were taken. May 12, 1980 Richard was with a cocktail waitress named Waya Zenfeld. He drugged and savagely beat her and bit her all over. Then he strangled her and dumped her in a car park in New Jersey. May 15 firefighters were called to a motel. They found the body of a young lady who had been severely beaten and bitten all over. Her breast was cut off and placed on the headboard. She was 25-year-old Geed Rayner, a prostitute. April 1980. Richard's marriage was breaking. Janet asked for a divorce on the grounds of cruelty, not having sex with her, not being home much, and not giving her any money. 18-year-old Leslie Danodell, a prostitute working in Times Square. She came across Richard, who said his name was Tommy. He took Leslie for drinks and talked to her about his divorce. He told Leslie he would like to get her out of prostitution and asked her if she'd like to go to New Jersey with him, so they got in the car and set out for New Jersey. He took her to dinner and then to a Quality Inn motel, the same motel where he murdered one of his previous victims. Once inside the room, he gave her $200 and said he would like to give her a massage, so he told her to take off all her clothes and lay on the bed. When she laid on the bed, he got on top of her and put a knife across her throat and told her not to scream. She laid there thinking, what has she done? Terrified and shaking, he said, "You're nothing but a dirty, or you deserve to die." Then he told her he was going to burn her nipples, her vagina, and Richard then bit so hard on her nipple the blood squirted out. He lapped up the blood running down her stomach. The nipple was hanging off. He rapped and sodomized her multiple times. He cut deep gashes in her body. She tried to scream, but she had duct tape over her mouth. Richard once again beat her round the room. He let her go and she grabbed what she thought was a real gun and pointed it at him. He grabbed the gun and laughed at her. He backhanded her so hard he knocked the duct tape from her mouth. She fell to the floor. Richard sliced her leg again with the knife. She screamed as loud as she could. One of the quest heard her and went and told the manager. He phoned the police. They arrived really quick. The police knocked the door and could again. Richard made her answer it. The police asked if she was all right. She shook her head yes, but they could see she was. They pulled her out the room and went and they looked around the room. There was blood everywhere. Richard was arrested. He was handcuffed and taken to the station, and Leslie was taken to the hospital. Richard was charged with kidnapping, attempted murder, aggravated assault with a weapon, aggravated sexual assault with a deadly weapon, sodomy, possession of dangerous drugs. In court he denied everything, but he found guilty. June 1981. He tried to commit suicide. On July 25 he was sentenced to between 173 and 197 years. He murdered 10 in New York and 12 in New Jersey. Named the Torso Killer, Times Square Ripper. He's now in New Jersey State Prison.